Well, I've just finished a conversation, dear listener, dear viewer, with Pat McGart, and I can tell you if I have to tell you what we were talking about, your ears would burn. Would that be a fair description, Pat?
That would be a fair
We
description,
say
yes.
some fairly explosive things of like,
If
but
only we could say them on air.
we'll get different explosive ones to say on air. Okay, let's not piss around. We had an interview, as everybody I'm sure knows, with Niall Murphy on Wednesday. Niall's the secretary of the, I think I said at the time, he's the secretary of the Ireland's Future Movement. And he talked to us very courteous and spoke to us for at least half an hour more. Um,
Yeah.
what would you take away? What were your takeaways, as they now say, Pat? What were your
Yeah.
takeaways from the interview?
Well, basically, what Niall is saying is the demographics are changing. The the traffic is one way, and he also made the point that there in the unionist community there seems to be a fair bit of denial about reality. But I think the overarching point he was making, Jude, was that the Dublin government isn't making sufficient moves to examine all this, and that what the last thing we need is a sort of a Brexit type vote on a border poll without people realizing uh, what's happening. And now that's not an original point, but it is the central point. If we're going to have a border poll and we're going to have to see what sort of Ireland we're going to have, we need to know what about policing. What about education? What about housing? All those things. Like look at Brexit. The Brits now don't know whether they should shit, share, or shave in regard to Brexit. Just a total mess. They're talking somewhere, and there now could be a 4% drop in the economy, which is massive, Jude. And there's all sorts of things going on, and they're trying now. Starmer is trying to realign with Europe, and there's all sorts of Jude. We that should have all been thought out, and we should have clear policies. And the final thing he said, basically, he's saying all the academics, the intellectuals, the politicians should all be get together and have this all sorted out. So when people go to the polls, as you've said it a million times yourself, we know what we're voting on, what we're voting for, and what we're voting against.
Yeah, I think that was one of the points he was keen to stress. Um, well, a couple of things. I asked him at one stage, what did he fear most? Because it is a fraught enterprise and there are going to be
Yeah,
problems. And I don't know, Niall. I think he said he didn't I fear nobody. And
yeah, he said that. Yeah,
any man that spent 30 days during COVID in a state of induced unconsciousness, when you come out of that, you fear nothing, I think.
yeah.
But the fact remains that there are things to fear, like obviously is a loyalist backlash, uh,
Mm,
fear that preparation is done in the wrong way. Here's
yeah.
what I'll say. Um, what Ireland's future is doing is very, very good, and it's getting in people like ourselves and saying, make your voice heard and so on. Those are civic forums. We must, as I said to him, we must involve the political parties. We must involve the governments. Now,
Mm.
Niall didn't talk about that. How can we make that leap, Pat? Do you think, from this general goodwill to more
Yeah.
nailed down
Well,
stuff?
but Julian, that's you've asked a question that I can't answer, and I don't think Niall answered it either, because the Dublin government, Michael Martin, and I didn't make the point, and it comes as a bit of surprise that the so-called, and he didn't, and I'm putting words in his mouth because he didn't say them here, but the blue shirt Fine Gael is actually more interested in the United Ireland, or the discussions about it, than the so-called Republican Party led by Michael Martin. In fact, Michael Martin has done absolutely nothing to advance the United Ireland. He keeps up with this shared Ireland thing, but that's like kicking a can down the road. It's a very good idea and it's worthy, but it's not doing anything about Brexit. And Michael Martin is this thing like, he keeps saying until Northern Ireland sorted out, we can't really talk about a United Ireland. Until Northern Ireland sorted out, me and you will be gone about 1,000 years. You know,
Yeah, I think we've got to get more clarity on the shape of
yeah, absolutely,
future Ireland. For example,
yeah,
is it going to be devolved? Is Stormont going to stay permanently or
yeah, yeah,
temporarily in a united Ireland with
well,
the headquarters
yeah,
in Dublin? That's a big question. It's also a
yeah.
fairly straightforward question. and people should
Yeah,
be grappling at it and giving reasons for it, reasons against it. Uh, the place of Britishness of unionists in the United Ireland, that has to be clarified. How would you give them that recognition? How would you?
yeah,
It's all very well to say, well, we lived our lives as Irish people,
yeah,
even though we were in a state that was British. Um, that doesn't answer the question of what role or what status, what things would be done,
yeah,
props to help the British or the Unionists maintain their Britishness if that's what they want to do. But we've got to say how that would happen. Here's an example of what we do. And I hear nobody saying that. Here's a last point, Pat, because I could go on all day about this. I think Niall's presence, what they've done is fantastic. It has advanced the cause of United Ireland, I would say almost immeasurably, those three big meetings. But here's a question. Why isn't there some way that all the goodwill from people like you and me and hundreds, thousands of people like us who are just as committed and interested in a united Ireland, why is there not some way in which we can help contribute to that? You and I are doing this and we're talking, all right, we're doing our blog here, and that's something. But there's thousands like us, and I just feel there's an awful lot of goodwill that's not been channeled or
yeah,
energized. And surely be not beyond the wit of people like Ireland's Future to harness that. If you think of Daniel O'Connell, I mean, I know that's going back a
yeah,
bit, but Daniel O'Connell had increasingly monster rallies, and that's what
yeah.
about Catholic emancipation. So, what do you think, Pat? Are there?
Jude, I think it's very self. Now, citizens' assemblies are one. Jude, I am really, if the government in Ireland was really serious, they could do a simple thing, right? In every county in Ireland, including the north, they could invite people to come along to a central place and said, "Here, and we're having a meeting on the 30th of September to discuss the whole issue of a border poll." And every county, Carlow, Laois, all those wee counties that nobody's ever sort of goes and visits, and says each county will have a forum where people are invited to come along, and we will take notes, etc., and we will diffuse or what would you say, distill what people have said, and we will discuss it, and then we will put it into some sort of report, and then have a look at it, and so on. They're doing nothing. Michael Martin has run away from citizens' assemblies like Usain Bolt in the Olympic final. He's running at a hell of it. And you were making the point about Niall. You asked him about governments and so on. Do we need to involve the governments? And we're not.
Yeah,
Jude, the governments are not. Niall's point is, I suppose, the UK government is basically their point. It's laissez-faire. Northern Ireland is a part of the UK, and it's not our job, etc., etc., etc. And we don't have to persuade anybody. But the Dublin government has, and the demographics, right? Like uh, Belfast is now Sinn Féin, Derry Sinn Féin. Four of the six counties are nationalist majorities. What more do you need to sort of say? Wait a minute, there's something here that's stirring, and we need to have a look at it.
I think most people know that, but it's a question of getting it organised into concrete form. I think your idea
Yeah,
of every county having a look at the issue under a number of headings, whether it be housing or
yeah,
education or health or whatever, I think that's
mm,
a very good one. But the only people with the sort of influence to make that call would be, I think, the Dublin government, or
yeah.
maybe organisations like Ireland's Future. But Niall doesn't seem to have that on their menu, as far as I could tell.
No, that's it. By the way, Jude, there's the other thing as well. Before we came on air, I read somewhere yesterday. One of the guys involved in the, I think it's Orange Order, the bands forum in Derry. He said that United Ireland and our border pool, it's never going to happen, not at least for 50 years. I think there's a bit of denial and delusion in the Protestant community. And remember the famous one, "Hey, you're a Lundy if you even talk about it." But Jude, the, the tectonic plates are shifting. Everybody knows it, and so on. So this thing about don't talk about it and it won't happen. That seems to be the. And by the way, that even from a Dublin government point of view, maybe they don't want. Maybe they just want it to go away as well.
Well, Niall's point when I raised that was that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are essentially centrist parties,
Yeah,
centrist right, and that would fit into the mold for Ulster Unionists and maybe DUP as
yeah,
well. So
absolutely.
they would find a home with them, and that's how they would find their place in the Dáil if there was a United Ireland,
Yeah,
and they wouldn't have any problem. I think he's got a point there. But again, that has to be talked about. If unionists are reluctant to open their mouths, and they are, about a United Ireland, what do those of us who want to talk about United Ireland, what are we going to do about it? Are we
yeah,
going to try to be nicer to them? Are we going to set up fora where people are invited individually, or representatives of different unionist parties are invited? And then if they don't come, there's an empty chair. I really am getting worried as hell. I'm delighted that Niall is so firm in the 2030. And I know Sinn Féin are firm in the 2030 as a year for the referendum. But I am not nearly as impressed by the concrete steps that have been taken to look at the issues that are going to be central to it. And I'm
just,
also
just,
not, I'm also not impressed by this. There's huge goodwill there. There's people would bust their
yeah,
ass if they were given the
yeah.
invitation. I don't know why they don't use that untapped energy. It's like sitting
Yeah,
on an
Jude, but
oil.
even just as you were speaking, two things came into my head. Like, what would we do about a national anthem? No, these are things and what would we do about the flag? Would the tricolour still be acceptable? No, and by the way, a lot of people,
I
I
think
think
those are
I'm down
easy things,
south.
Pat. I think those are easy
Uh,
things. I know they're
yeah,
emotional, but I think
but
they're
hold on
easy.
a wee second, Jude. I think about last year. I can't remember. I think it was what there was a poll done. A lot of people down south said, "In the event of United Ireland, would you accept the changing of the national anthem? And would you change?" A lot of people said no.
I think that's really stupid. I really think that's stupid
Yeah.
because the message that sends out is we want the North, but we want them to come in under our terms. We want them to
Yeah.
be part of what we are. That's wrong. That's wrong. The people
Ah,
in the North are every bit as Irish as the people in the other three provinces. So you should be looking at ways to accommodate everybody. And
yeah.
personally, I know people have strong feelings on this. Personally, the flag and the anthem, I don't mind which.
Yeah.
As John Hume said, you can't eat a flag. You can't eat a
Yeah.
flag. And the anthem, I mean, it's a good enough anthem, but there are better.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Germany, what
But
was
I know.
it?
I work on the
Deutschland
basis.
über
I think
alles.
should be.
There's a national anthem.
What's that?
I say
What you say?
Deutschland über alles. Now there it
At
is
least
again.
no, there's an. Wasn't it one of the was it one of the Americans said that look at those Germans they're not singing their national there are no words to the German national anthem
Oh, I think I've understood there. I don't
or
know
it's
to
the
tell you the
Spanish one I
truth,
can't
but
remember.
I've always thought that maybe there's not. You could be right. Maybe it's just the title, Deutschland, Deutschland. But see, we only hear these during the Olympic Games or that kind of thing, and I
Yeah,
often think
yeah,
some of them are wonderful. Actually, I
absolutely. I
think the
agree with you
French
too.
national anthem is marvelous. I think
Marvelous.
the Russian
Le
one was bloody
Mercier.
good. Yeah,
Yeah,
The Russian one is very well good as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Anyway, I would put out a plea to our viewers and listeners, right? If there's any way you can answer that question that we have posed, that is, what concrete steps can be taken? Let's say
Can we
inside the
take?
next 1 year, because there's only five
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
So inside the next year, what would you do that would put some flesh, however thin, onto the bones of a United Ireland, if that's what we feel,
yeah.
or if you feel otherwise, what would you do? Okay, call to action. Call to not to arms. Call to
Call to
action.
action.
Okay,
Yeah,
right. Dermot Ferreter has an article on the Irish Times, and in some ways, I think it's very timely. And in other ways, I wonder why it took people, him or whoever, so long to say it. He's saying essentially that everybody knows Netanyahu in the Middle East is saving himself and his party from being ejected from office. He wants to keep his ultra right wing coalition partners on board, and he wants to prolong as possible the legal cases that'll be brought against him. But he goes further than that, and he says Netanyahu's long career is based on something deeper than that, and that is a commitment to an exclusively Jewish state in all of mandatory Palestine from the river to the sea. The very
yeah,
opposite of what, some people would say, Gaza shall be free from the river to the sea. What do you think of that? Do you think is he saying that it's just written into the guy's DNA that is apart
Yeah.
from self-protection?
Uh, uh, Further said that Netanyahu's father was an advisor to, he was a historian and he was advisor to the Israeli government back 40 years ago. And without question, he's a total racist, Netanyahu. The Arabs don't count. It's as simple as that, dude. And he has openly admitted that he has this plan for Greater Israel, including taking over more. Once they get Gaza out of the way, they will probably head for Jordan or someone like that. I'm not quite sure, but he is this sort of, and it's this. Dude, when I was doing my MA, I remember reading this guy saying, when you have a political problem, it's difficult, and when you have a religious problem, it's difficult. But when you have politics and religion and the one problem, it's nearly impossible. Like Northern Ireland, what just wasn't political. There was identity and there was religion, and like Paisley and people like that, and so on. Right in the Middle East now, Netanyahu has basically said that the Arabs are the enemy, and he said he's quoted as saying there's no place for the weak in the Middle East, so military power is whatever. And Jude, he's been hiding behind this sort of thing that we're under threat, while using that threat to actually attack everywhere else. He's
Mhm.
attacked Iran, he's attacked Lebanon, he's attacked Syria, and so on. And the, here's the thing, Jude. He's not going to be stopped because there's going to be the one group of people who can stop them are the Americans, and there's not a hope in hell they're going to do it. And the EU is complicit, and the UK is complicit. Like, Jude, when the Starmer was saying that I am opposed to this absolute genocide,
Mm.
they were still flying reconnaissance flights. The RAF were flying reconnaissance flights for the Israelis. So, Jude, you tell me, where is this going to end?
Well, at the end of Dermot Ferreter's article today, he notes that it was 18 months ago when senior UN leaders referred to the situation in Gaza as being a crisis of humanity, a living hell, a bloodbath. And he says, since then, all we have heard are a dictionary of condemnation. But words, he
Uh,
says, remain unmatched by meaningful action. Any kind of action. Netanyahu, the one word we haven't used about him is he's a war criminal. He is
yes,
a
yeah.
war criminal, every bit as much as Eichmann or other people like that. So he should be held to account. And what in the name of God is the UN doing when they don't address this question? Are they admitting their own impotence or what?
Yeah, they are, but the Americans have vetoed everything, because they're a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and they've vetoed everything. But Jude, I wrote it down. Uh, we see his father. He says there's not even the slightest hope of ever obtaining political agreement with the Arabs inhabitants of Palestine because every indigenous people will resist alien settlers as long as they see any hope of ridding themselves of the danger of foreign resettlement. In other words, Netanyahu knows they're the invaders, they're the colonizers, and they're going to basically eradicate the indigenous people. It's on the record. He's already said that.
Is that what's
So
going to
he
happen?
knows
Is
it's
that going
called
to be the end of it,
colonization.
Pat? Is that how it's going
That,
to end? With
that's how it's going to
absolute.
end, Jude. Aye. Jude, I think they're sort of saying we're going to take the hit now in world opinion. We're just going like there was Jude. I just saw it, and I should have taken note of it. A woman, she was I think an ITN reporter or Channel 4 reporter, and they were flying. She says, "This is as close as we can get, but even we can see." She says the devastation. The Israelis wouldn't allow journalists on aid planes because he said they would use it to show how much devastation. Dude, you used the term Netanyahu's a war criminal. There are a lot of war criminals in Israel, a hell of a lot. They
Mhm.
they have shot dead and totally innocent people. They've committed cold blooded murder. They have starved, what was it, 2.3 million people. They openly admit now that they've bombed hospitals. They've bombed schools. They've bombed and it is unbelievable. A British surgeon has said they were deliberately shooting children in the testicles.
Uh-huh.
You
How
know,
how
like
can how can how can how can the UN people look in the mirror in the morning and say, "Oh,
yeah.
I'm a proponent of law on the international stage"? How can they do that?
Well, but I know that I think there's 15 members of the Security Council, and 14 of them voted to condemn Israel. The lady from America vetoed it, and she started lecturing the other ones about their, Jude, it was unbelievable. It really is unbelievable that the Americans, we all, and Jude, let's get this clear: the Americans are totally compromised. APAC has bought just about every one of them, and that's a fact. It's not
Mm.
anti-Jewish or anti whatever. It's fact. Check it out. It's not,
Mm.
it's not
Mm.
state secret or anything.
So do we just throw up our hands and say just
No, 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 no.
well, it's hard to know what you can do. I mean, I remember when
Yeah,
I was a kid, there was talk, and we thought it was great, that the Jews in Israel were making flowers grow in the desert, was the
yeah.
expression.
That all that
And I remember we
propaganda.
admired, my God, isn't that something? I have a
Yeah.
terrible fear of this, Pat, that they actually will push the Gazans out of Gaza. They
Well,
will make it into a sort of a Mediterranean resort. And that then with time people will say, God, that's lovely. I wonder what happened to those Palestinians. I have
yeah,
a terrible feeling that's in some version of that is how it's going to end. That the Palestinian people will be abandoned, just as there are other people who have been abandoned as well. For example, I'll give you an example, and it's a tough one, and that is the travelling people in Ireland. I
yeah,
think everybody has given up on in terms of trying to help those people. Uh, and they have shorter lives, they have all sorts of chronic health problems, education
yeah.
problems,
Suicide rate's very high.
everything bad.
Yeah,
And yet here we are, and people say, oh, that's too bad now. Oh, what pity, somebody should do something about it. I think that's the way it's going to end in Israel or
yeah.
in
Dude, I was watching
Palestine.
Miriam Margolyes. She was
Oh,
going around New Zealand, and I was watching it on BBC Two the other night. And one of the nice things was she went to a lot of the Maori things, and the Maoris are one of the few indigenous people that seem to have come out the other end quite strong. The
mm,
Aborigines in America much like the traveling people in Ireland. There's suicide rates very high. There's alcoholism at an unbelievable rate. They live in these sort of like reservations that are, shitholes. That's about the only way you could describe them, because of the whole way they've been treated. And look at, of course, the biggest genocide of all was that of the American Indians. And then we all grew up with the John Wayne
oh,
version of
yeah.
other barbarians and savages. They were actually the nicest people with a lovely culture. And
Mm.
the bullshit we were taught. By the way, Jude, I think the final point I'll make. The eyes or the scales have dropped all over eyes about America, haven't it? It's just not a nice land. It is
That's
not.
true. That's largely owing to Trump,
Yeah,
because he personifies America. He's actually militarizing internally to a shocking
yeah,
extent. Like he's sending in stormtroopers essentially. There's that guy I talked to you about, Richard Wolf. Check him out
yeah,
on
yeah,
YouTube. Anybody I advise them check out Richard Wolf on YouTube. He's originally from Germany. He's a Jew. He's an academic, and boy, can he talk about the state of the world. He talks about the empires which peak and die. He talks about
yeah,
the time the 19th century British Empire peaked and died. The 20th century, the American Empire peaked and died. And people say, oh, well, what are you talking about? Well, he says, Trump says he's going to make America great again. That suggests it's not great now. And he's dead right.
yeah,
He listed a few things. He said, Vietnam, they had to get out. Afghanistan, they had to
yeah.
get
They had
out.
to get out.
And he says the Middle East is going to be the same thing. They're going to have to get out.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, they're not
yeah,
in there in the same way, but they're pumping the money in and making the bloodshed possible. Um, anyway, check out Richard Wolf. I think he's well worth viewing. Okay, there's an article by Oliver Millman about, jeez, pardon my laughter. I shouldn't laugh at something serious. Robert F. Kennedy has
Jesus, yeah.
got rid of his deputy and has put in his place a guy called
Jim O'Neill,
Jim O'Neill, a good Irish name,
his
Jim
name.
O'Neill. Now, what Jim O'Neill knows about medicine and vaccines and so on could be written on a tomtit's arse and still leave room
Uh,
for the Lord's Prayer. Uh, uh,
yeah,
I know when I say that now, maybe I'm not being unfair to him because, for example, Martin McGuinness was the Minister for Education. And Martin McGuinness, by his own admission, was a total failure in terms of school. So
Yeah.
are we being too hard on this poor Jim O'Neill by
No,
saying,
no, Jude. A number of people have actually. I think there's been four major resignations from the Central for Disease Control in Atlanta. All the top people. There was a guy. He wrote a brilliant letter. I read it there earlier this week. The main guy, he resigned. He refused point blank. He says what Trump is doing is basically he's politicizing health policy for political gain, not for health. And this guy Jim O'Neill, he during the COVID thing, he was promoting all these ridiculous conspiracy theories and all the rest of it, as Kennedy. Now, Jim O'Neill said Kennedy, during the outbreak of measles in Texas, which is the worst outbreak in a generation, he said Kennedy was doing a great job and all the rest of it. The woman who was fired this week, who she was only appointed a month ago, at the top, she refused point blank. She said there was no evidence, scientific, medical, to back up some of the policies they are now insisting she follows. She was also being told to fire some key scientists because they were not following President Trump's agenda,
do
and
you
she refused. So she's only in the job a month, and so she says the whole thing has been. It's not health; it's politics.
well, do you see guys like Robert F. Kennedy or this Jim O'Neill guy? Do
Yeah,
they believe sincerely what they're doing? Like they're essentially anti-vax.
yeah,
Are they serious? Do you think they're
yeah.
putting that
But
on, or
look,
is it the truth as far as they see it?
I think it's the truth as far as they see it. But
Oh,
that's what makes them
jeez.
even worse because
Jeez.
something. I don't think anybody with a brain thinks vaccines are a great idea. In fact, Jude, can I tell you a quick story? My youngest son, when he was small, when he was about 3 or 4, he was a really chronic asthmatic, really, really bad, really, really bad. He was hospitalized several times. And anyway, he's putting 3 or 4 different medications. And one day I went over, and my wife, that day she couldn't go over, but she says, "Would you mention to the doctor about the fact that he's on 4 different medications and he's only 4?"
Mhm.
And I went to the doctor and I said, "Excuse me, doctor, whatever his name was." And he was an Egyptian guy. And I said, "Look, my wife is very concerned. This wee fella, he's on Ventolin and he's on steroids and he's on something else. And he's only 4, and she's very concerned about the fact he's on." He says, he stood and the doctor stood for him. He said, "Mr. McGard, can I put it this way? Much better the medication than the attack." And dude, that's my view of vaccines. Much better the vaccine than the attack. You
Mhm.
know, uh, you know. And I'm not saying that medicines are great or vaccines are great, but what I'm saying, dude, I don't remember the name. I might have been Elizabeth Warren. She was, no, it wasn't, because she was a qualified doctor, and I don't think she was when Kennedy was up for a Senate hearing to confirm his position as the health secretary. She said, "Have you ever seen?" No, she went through all the different things that kids can get, and Kennedy was not able to respond to one of them. Every time she's, "Have you ever seen a child with smallpox?" No. Well, she said, "I have." And she went on, "Do you ever see a child with rubella and German measles?" She went through it all. And she said, basically, you haven't a clue.
Kind of astonishing that Kennedy should be the one to be the health minister in such a disastrous way. I mean, first of all, if you look at him, he's obviously a man who's not all that well. He obviously is
Yeah.
carrying so. I mean, his face is on fire,
Yeah. And his voice is gone. Apparently, that
and his
was,
voice,
he
the
was,
voice and the
uh,
face both.
he,
So if
he
you,
apparently smoked and had drugs, and he was an alcoholic, or along those lines.
well, because a man has a past, it doesn't mean he can't have a future.
No, no, but what I'm
But
saying is,
aye.
but his own family have disowned him.
Oh
The
yeah, oh
Kennedys,
yeah.
yeah.
If in fact these people believe it, they must believe it. On what basis, I wonder? I mean, do they have an alternative set of,
Yeah, I see there's something, no, like climate change, Jude. There
yeah.
are some scientists who said climate change is a fake, and it's, just nature working. And then it's the same. There are some medical people who are saying vaccines don't work. But Jude, the point about it is, about what a century ago, people were dying at the 40s and 50s. They're now living 80s and 90s. So I think medical science has proved, things have improved. So
Well, when
I tend to believe the people who spent 7 or 8 years studying medicine rather than the boys who's read something, done a keyboard warrior.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Excuse me.
true. But I mean, first, I don't understand how people can be anti-vax when we see the effect that the vaccination had
Yeah,
for COVID. We had it, had it
yeah,
on a global scale, and now it's
yeah.
essentially ended. Do they not see that? And they're still
Dude, they
anti-vax.
had to bring in the army to bury the dead. I think it was at Bergamo in Italy. The same was on parts of New York. And then out came the vaccine. By the way, Jude, I remember seeing something on social media where it said the army had to be brought in to bury the dead. And somebody came out, one of the conspiracy theorists come back and says, you're stupid. That was a military exercise. Dude, they were denying what was actually on the news the night before.
I shouldn't be laughing because it's such a grave thing. I
Yeah.
wonder what it's like to live in America now. I should know, my son's there, but I wouldn't like to
Can I
live in
tell
that
you,
country.
just to digress, Florida has lost 6 billion this year. The Canadians are refusing to go there. I think Elizabeth Warren, the aforementioned, she said I think there's about 15 countries now basically have stopped sending parcels and things to the Americans because of all the tariffs and so on. And she says we're going to be a great isolated country very shortly, thanks to Trump. And Jude, would you see set up if tomorrow morning I offered you 2 tickets to go to say Florida? Would you go?
No chance. No chance. No chance at all. Uh, I mean, it literally is a place where guys who've got masks in their face can jump out of a car, grab you, put a hood over your head, and throw you in the back, and you might never be seen
Yeah.
again. At least if what we're told is true. Now,
And
obviously,
let's be honest, dude. If they start looking either your or mine social media profile, we'd be gone anyway. You'd be in about 15 years, and I'd be in about the same. You know,
oh, we can always tap on the pipe to each other.
and I don't think I'll be visiting Jerusalem anytime soon either.
Anyway, let's finish with one on the whole question of work. There's an article on this too today. The person doing it says that John Maynard Keynes, the economist of the last century, I guess, about I don't know how many years ago, in the 20th century anyway, he forecast that because of human progress, their need for work would just about be halved. That is to say, people who are now working 40-hour weeks wouldn't have to work more than about 15, and that they
Yeah.
could have, do 3 days essentially or three half days, and that'd be enough. There'd be robots and all the rest. Uh, it hasn't quite worked out that way, and it's not simply because. Well, you figure, Pat. Why do you think it hasn't worked out that way? Why isn't there
Well,
a 15-hour week?
well, I think he based it on the old gentry, the English, back in the 1800s when, or even the first part of this century or the
Yeah.
last century, sorry, that because they had so much money, they could go hunting and shooting, and they looked after their assets for about a couple of hours in the morning.
Mm.
What I think, Jude, a lot of modern people, I think there's more to just life, than sitting around watching TV. I think a lot of people, there's a status in work, there's a sort of a meaning in work, and gives you a routine, and so on. And I think a lot of people in modern life want to work. As well as that, I think, Jude, a lot of people have this idea. I've got a nice Peugeot 308, so I want a Peugeot such and such, or I want a bigger model. And all. I think people, and maybe in modern life, work because of the status it brings to them. As there's more to just life than just the other side of the story, Jude. Look at my kids. Like when you have two people working, you have kids at university and all. You need to work.
Aye, that's true. That's true. I think they underestimate the extent to which people need to keep the standard of living we're used to. There's no question but that two people, if there are two people in a family, they've got to go out to work, the adults, for sure.
Absolutely.
Even though they're
But
having
Jude,
to
there's a
pay a
social, no,
fortune.
that sort of thing too, Jude. There's a social connection, and
Ah,
and then there's also that thing, maybe like personal achievement. Jude, do
mhm.
you just fancy sitting at home all day with your feet up, drinking, your gin and tonic?
Well, yeah, sort of, yes. Sort of, yes. Maybe I've always thought well, I'm sort of convinced actually I am a bit of a workaholic. Not so much
Yeah.
workaholic as activity-holic.
Activity holic,
I have to be
yeah.
doing something. The worst, if you wanted to commit me to hell, put me on a beach with the sun shining. I'll just lie
I'm the
there.
same. Yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
As long as you have something to do.
Let's retire to our boudoirs now and turn on the
And get a
music.
gin and tonic. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, Dr.
Okay,
Collins.
Pat. Thanks very much.
All the
Look
best,
after
Jude. See
yourself
you
now.
later. Good luck.
Slán go fóill.
Bye.